being away from my parents and siblings from a young age was a trauma of its sorts. Helped me view life differently as I learned how to be alone quite early. It's such a trauma because I've not recovered from that as an adult. I like being alone.
Thank you so much for having me. My name is Nyambura Gathumbi. I am a systemic marriage and family therapy. That's a fancy name of saying that I have a master's in marriage and family therapy. But ideally, in my everyday to-day life, I am a psychologist. Some call me a counselor, others call me a therapist. It's still the same name. And I love what I do. I wouldn't be doing this any other day or any other way. So what is trauma? Let's look at the numbers first. 3 in every 4 in adults, which means 6 in every 8, which means 7 in every 10, so that's 70% of adults will go through at least one traumatic event or experience in their life. So let's understand. So to understand trauma, you need to look at something we call the 2 E's, an event and an experience. So trauma is an event that happens to you that causes you to have a distraught emotional experience. We are very, very fragile as human beings. Our soul first has no capacity for secrets. And so when something traumatic happens to you, it's the whole emotional experience that you're going through that causes you distress. Ideally, we have different types of trauma, but all of them are trauma. So we have emotional abuse, that's a trauma. We have adverse childhood experiences, that's a trauma. We have the external traumas like the Al-Shabaab attack. All these are traumas. And what do they have in commonality is that it's one singular event that happened to an individual that caused them to feel emotionally distraught. So that's trauma. So in the medical field, how the definition and understanding of trauma has evolved is that neuroscientists, neurologists, and psychiatrists and psychologists, of course, we are not on the same level. Neurologists and neuroscientists and psychiatrists are beginning to understand that you cannot separate the body and the mind. Is that what affects the mind affects the body. And so actually in more advanced medical environments, you're finding that patients are being taken through an in-depth family history that captures what we call ACE, that is adverse childhood experiences. And under the ACE, we have 10 questionnaires that check on, did the child have an environment where there was a lot of abuse? Was the child exposed to a parent who was incarcerated or who was imprisoned? Was the child exposed to parents who suffered from substance abuse? Did the child was the child sexually abused either by a minor or by an adult? Was the child provided for the basic needs? And in these hospitals, they find that these children who are exposed to adverse childhood experiences have at least 80% susceptibility of incurring what we call somatic illnesses. And somatic illnesses, some of them are things like asthma, eczema, and in adults, things like high blood pressure, and diabetes, because that's a hormonal imbalance. And so when the doctors take an in-depth history of these children and of these adults, they're actually able to join with psychologists like myself to help reassign the trauma and reprocess the trauma in a way that it doesn't continue causing the individual emotional experience. So we are seeing such a broad advancement and an encouraging trajectory of incorporating the medical field as well as the psychology field together as one, because you cannot separate the body and the mind. So if we compare our times now with those of our grandparents and our fathers, times are different, as we always say. Why is trauma being talked about now in place of then? Oh, that's a loaded question. So let me try and answer it from the 1900s. And so we are looking at great-great-grandfather. So 1900s, you have the plague, and then after that you have World War I, then after that you have World War II, and then you have colonization, and then you have freedom. And so our parents came from such a lineage of trauma that and this is the phenomena about trauma, is that when you're in an environment that is highly threatening, the next thing that you need to do is to survive. Thriving is never an option. And so now we are thriving because we don't have to worry about food. Well, for those of us who don't have to worry about food, we don't have to worry about education. We have accessibility to information that they didn't have. However, two main pioneers in the primary field of trauma in epitomology, so this is Dr. Rachel Yehuda and this is Michael Wallin. They show that trauma is intergenerationally passed through our DNA, and that's shocking. So Rachel Yehuda studied babies and a lineage of Jewish babies who had come from the Nazi regime. And she found out that the babies, if the grandmother was exposed to the Nazi regime, the mother was susceptible to trauma and the daughter was susceptible to trauma. And this is transmitted through genes. And so even though now we have the opportunity and the ability and the information to know about what trauma is, literally we have no excuse. Our parents and our grandparents they didn't have anything. And it's so admirable for them because even coming from such a heavy and scarce environment, they were able to do what they did to us. So for us now, we have the time, we have the information, we have the experience, we have the resources that we do not have an excuse into transforming or passing down trauma. So in summary, their time did not allow that because there was a lot of surviving to do, looking for food here, trying to get money there, trying to establish an identity that was broken by colonization. We're not experiencing that now. Now that we are kind of settled, we have the need to thrive, and hence we talk about things that are impeding our progress in thriving. That's the reason why trauma is so thrive right now within the society. So we want to understand how trauma and the response of trauma has evolved within the Kenyan society. For us to move forward, we need to go back to history to understand the trends of history so that we gain the lessons so that we carry them forward. So let's look at our grandfathers. They went through, literally they were affected by the two wars, they were affected by the Great Depression, they were affected by abject poverty, they were affected by drought. By the time they were grandfathers, they had their sons who are our fathers, right? Then they had a society that literally managed all aspects of the societal life. And to be honest, sometimes I envy that because if we had a stronger society in this day and age, we would not be feeling as lonely as it is. In fact, in the UK, they've mentioned one of the pandemics of the humanity, of the human race is loneliness. So they had a society that catered for everything. They had the wazers, and then the women had their thing, and the women would mentor the younger girls, and the younger girls had a community of their own. So ideally, they were age societal, we call them safety nets. Unfortunately, we don't have that today. What we have today, and thank God, in his own appointed time, are professional therapists like myself. And because of the breakdown of the societal societies or the safety nets that we had, if an individual can be able to come to therapy, because we teach you how to create these safety nets with wisdom and with discernment and also with a lot of knowledge. If somebody cannot, there is so much information on YouTube, on Google, on how to self-heal yourself. And then there's also a lot of information on how to get friends. And well, I must mention this, in the next 10 to 20 years, it's going to be so hard to connect emotionally to individuals. And so what you can do before we get there is now start harvesting strong emotional connections so that you guys can then now create small villages of either your husbands, your wives, your children, so that your children know that there's a larger community. Because the thing with healing trauma is that you never, ever, ever separate the individual from the environment the same way you never separate the individual's body from the mind. You always need to heal trauma within a societal context. Okay, so let me try and paint a picture of how trauma has harmed the current Kenyan society. I, as a therapist, one of the things I try to do is not to be judgmental. So if these statements are judgmental, please forgive me, it's not. It's mainly for informative information. Now, if you drive around on a Friday night, kwanza ukiwa pale Kiambu Road, what do you see? Like cars are parked on this side and there are cars on this side and the clubs are full. So that literally is one sign of a societal that is ailing. How come? Whenever you find that there is excessive consumption of alcohol, it's not about the experience with the alcohol, it's about a numbing effect. So we know that majority of us are numbing, and it doesn't help that the taxes are crazy, that the economy is hard. So of course, it's understandable if you would want to drink or if you feel like that is a solace, that's fine, no judgment. But that's a number one determined to actually check how is the society doing. The other thing is relationships. And when you drive around, the talk of marriage, which for me I'm completely against, I think it's just, anyway. So the talk of marriage, again, is not healthy, you know, and the acceptance of other people to come into the marriage is also not healthy. The other thing that you can see, which is quite sensitive right now, is the amount of brutality against one another. When you find that, and it's almost every day somebody is being killed because of something, that's a huge telltale sign of that there's something wrong with the society. By the way, guys, all of us are mad, all of us, even me. But it's the determinant of to what level are you mad and what are you doing about your madness. So I'm not sitting here saying like I have my things covered out. No, certainly not. It's that everyone is going through so much stress, and that stress is driving us to want to forget the stress, but the mind doesn't work that way. The way you would best manage stress is to actually combat it head on. And when you combat it head on, you get skills so that the next time, when the next phase of stress comes about, you have the skills to manage the stress in a better way. So how can we handle our traumas to make sure that we don't pass them down? So the number one is awareness. I always take my clients through something we call like a family tree, trying to help them understand what are their familial patterns. What is the dominant family language, and this is family system language. So, and I don't want it to be jargon, so I'm just going to try and explain it to the detail. In our families, so the family comes first, then society, then the country, and then the world, right? So in our families, how we relate with each other is called a family language. When we go through the family tree, you start to identify certain themes. Theme number one is substance use. And by the way, wherever you see substance use, just know there is some level of stress. Number two, we look at diseases. What kind of diseases are there in your family? Because these diseases help you to understand how to live a healthy life. Number three, we look at death. What is the cause of death in your family? And number four, which is escaping my mind right now, we look at marriages or relationships. This way, you're able to pick out like in my family of origin, all our firstborns are stepchildren. And I didn't even know that until I did the family tree and realized, oh my gosh, my father was a stepchild. I come from a family of 5, 3 girls and 2 boys. And just as the Lord would have it, I'm smack in the middle. So when I did the family tree, literally all our firstborns are stepchildren. And so I gathered my family together and said, listen, this stops with us. Even my son is 18 and my nieces are like 18 and 12 and some are 25. I told them, this is our family pattern. We cannot have children after the wedlock. So now moving forward, they know. So the first step is awareness. The second step, if you're able to come to therapy, great, come. And please choose a professional therapist. And now you can reach out to the Kenya Counselor Psychologist Board to find out if your therapist is certified or if they're licensed. That's an amazing thing that the government of Kenya did. If you can't come to therapy, once again, there are some elements on the website that are free that help you identify this is a family tree. This is what you should look out for a family tree. This is how you should treat certain ailments of a family tree. Now, if you can't do that, go to your church. I hope your church is a Bible-believing church, because church offers a community of of believers and support, and there's a lot of love. Now, if you're not a Christian and you don't go to church, get into a societal society. Is there a football club? Is there a place where like Ligindogo where people go to watch football? Now, if you can't do that, pick a society from your hobbies. Now there's the EPL and everything happening. Get some friends who you can talk to. Now, if you can't do that, gather your family together and just communicate that as a family unit, you guys need to have healthier relationships and start building on those. Ideally, to say therapy is not the only option. If you can come for it, great, because it offers an elevation into awareness and what you need to do for your family. But if you can't do that, the Lord has provided so many resources outside therapy that you can be able to help yourself. And you should remember this word in scripture that says God has given us time and chance. So the race is not for the strong, neither is the battle for the race is not for the swift, neither is the battle for the strong, but to us all He's given time and chance. So it's for you to decide what to do with that time and chance. How can we as a society help people who've been affected by trauma? Remember that 70%, so it's 70% helping 70%. So all of us have been affected by trauma in one way or another. The best way to support somebody who has been affected by trauma is so simple, and it's within your reach, and it's to listen. And not to listen to respond, to just listen. When somebody calls you and they say, oh, this is what my boss has done, don't try and give a solution. Just empathize with the person, sympathize with them, affirm them, and how that would look like is, I'm sorry that you're going through this, but remember the reason why you're in that job is to provide for your family, is to provide for yourself. What we can do is to help you revamp your CV so that you can start looking for other jobs. The thing with us, human beings, we have to learn active listening, and majority of us don't listen actively. So just listen. Number two, see if you can come around them as a society. If it's a group of girls, can you guys come around this person who's going through a traumatic experience? Maybe they've been heartbroken. Maybe they're going through a divorce. Maybe they've suffered a child loss. Maybe the parents have died. Just come together and literally just shower love to this individual. Healing trauma calls for societal unity, which calls for a lot of love and compassion. The other thing you can do is what we call acts of service. Make them a chapel here and there, take it to their house, tell them, I'm sorry you're going through this. I just thought to bring some food to comfort you. The other thing you can do, if they have children, take their children away for maybe 6 or 7 hours, allow them to just sit and think. And then when the children come back, just assure them of your friendship. The other thing you can do is take them out for a walk. There are many things that you can do. If you can, ask them to come for therapy. If they can't afford therapy, you can resort to all these things. And for Christians, prayer always works. Go to that person's house, sit with them, pray with them, then come back. And once they're out of the season, that act of service will be remembered by this person. That is a show of love, and we're called to love. So as a society, how can we increase awareness of trauma and promote resilience to those who are going through trauma? The first thing is to talk about the dysfunctionalities within our society and literally within our families. And I know this is countercultural. Many people don't like to talk about the dysfunctionalities in their families. And actually, the more we don't talk about the dysfunctionalities in our families, the more we promote what is called toxic shame. And toxic shame is that feeling, that constant feeling that, and you know there's toxic shame when an individual asks themselves, what will people say? What will people think? Talking about dysfunctionalities actually normalizes trauma. Because the thing with trauma is that somebody feels like it happened to them alone, like sexual abuse. But when you talk about it, you open up these dysfunctionalities and you ensure that if it's, for example, sexual abuse, we call it CSA, child sexual abuse, which, by the way, 98% of all cases of CSA or 98% of all cases of child sexual abuse happen within the family, like 98%. When we talk about the dysfunctionalities of within the family, we make sure that this doesn't happen. And so that these children grow up to be more healthier and they're able to get into more healthy relationships and they're able to actually develop in a healthier way. So the thing that we need to be doing is to talk about dysfunctionalities in our families. You need to come up with groups that you talk about this in a healthy way, because you also don't want somebody to take that information from that group and shame you. You don't want that. So you also have to vet. And again, you can see how society is important in demystifying these dysfunctions within the family. The other thing that we can do is come for therapy if you're going through trauma, but reach out to all these other society provisions that the Lord has provided. Church, chamas, those are still they are a good place for you to vent about what is happening. So how can we increase resilience is by talking about the trauma. So if somebody has gone through, for example, abuse within the marriage, and you've been able to open up your mind and your heart to listening to them, you're literally giving them hope, knowing that one day this will pass. And that hope, when practiced, literally strengthens resilience. I hope you can be able to see that these things are literally within reach. And these are things that we can do interpersonally within ourselves, but also with each other, because we need each other. So just in summary, I want to close by bringing your understanding of trauma in a very, very, very simplistic way. So trauma affects what we call the whole individual. Biology, trauma affects your body. How I mentioned about the story about the young boy who was sexually abused. But in our Kenyan African society, how does trauma look like? Biologically, when you find that a dysfunctionality has become a functionality in your life, like somebody abusing you, somebody beating you, you being okay with not being treated well, that is going to affect you biologically. How? It's going to affect your sleep. If you're a lady, it's going to affect your skin. If you're a man, it's going to affect your sexual performance and your confidence. So that's biologically. So psychologically, it's going to affect you, because you're going to go through what we call rumination. And because trauma is an event that we experience, and it's the body and the mind goes round and round and round on the same thing. This is what we call ruminating on the same thing, trying to make meaning. So when you go round and round, your hormones are imbalanced, you're not able to think well, and you don't have a general emotional well-being. You're not able to make decisions. Social, you withdraw, because you're like, hey, when I look on social media, which is just another conundrum altogether, everyone looks like they're so well put together. Mimi too, I'm the only one who is suffering. So you become withdrawn, which is very, very devastating for anyone who's going through trauma, because you need the society to heal with trauma. Biopsychosocial, spirituality, you start to wonder, what has God done? Has God forgotten me? And in this biopsychosocial spiritual, the healing of trauma is one. It's in understanding that trauma is healed within a societal context. And even with therapy, that's a societal context. That's a relationship that you're coming into therapy with, to help you understand, to help you make meaning, and to equip you with mental skills to help you just heal the trauma altogether. So with healing of trauma, it always starts with awareness that you went through a trauma and there's no shame about it. And then you progress into the healing of trauma. Now, a philosophical question is then asked of, should we then not go through trauma? I don't think we shouldn't as human beings. Trauma, the gift of trauma is empathy. Because when you go through something and someone comes and tells you, oh, I've been going through this, you're able to empathize because you've gone through it. And in fact, it is a trauma if somebody has not gone through a trauma, because they don't have that understanding that human beings suffer. So is it good that you went through trauma? Certainly not. But it is advantageous that it increases your resilience. So we are not looking to never get into traumas again, because life is life and life lives. We are looking at ensuring that if you do ever get into a traumatic experience caused by a traumatic event, you have the resilience and you have the tools to get through it and become an even stronger, more empathetic, and more loving and compassionate human being. So thank you so much.